Women all over the world unite against men. I'm talking about women refusing to date men, to marry men, to sleep with men, and to have kids with men. And for the very first time ever, when covering a topic, I can really see the point on both sides of the argument. I came across multiple videos and articles of women who claim there is just no point in having kids in our times. There is no point in having a husband. And it used to be only Gen Z. We saw a lot of creators covering the topic, how young generations don't see sense in having kids. Well, now it's taken the form of a movement that's spread across all age groups. The movement called 4B originated in South Korea 5 years ago, a country which is now suffering from an extremely low birth rate. And things are getting serious on our side of the world, as we see governments literally shaking because the population rates are falling insanely quickly. I want to dissect this topic today because I am now officially obsessed with it. And just as a disclaimer, I'm not against men. I actually hope society will get it together and men and women will be able to create beautiful relationships again, where both sides are happy and fulfilled. Anyway, here's the article that started it all for me. Baby bust to see shrinking populations in 97% of countries by 2100. And then it says, falling fertility rates mean nearly every country could have a shrinking population by 2050, a new study has found. Researchers from the University of Washington estimate that more than 3/4 of countries, 155 of the 204 nations included in the study, will not have high enough fertility rates to sustain their population size. This figure will increase to 97% of countries by 2100. While fertility rates will drop in most parts of the world, comparatively high fertility rates in low-income countries will, in contrast, drive population increases in certain regions, predominantly in Eastern and Western Sub-Saharan Africa. So as I mentioned already, this whole movement of women refusing to be with men stems from South Korean movement called B4, which slowly but surely made its way to Europe, USA, Canada, and other parts of the world. We can see it becoming a huge trend on social media at the moment. Service 95 article explains. 4B is based on 4 principles: no heterosexual marriage, no to childbirth, no to dating, and no to heterosexual relationships. The movement's proponents, such as YouTubers Lina Bey and Bikana and Young Se-young, post updates on its aims and progress. After studying feminism and non-marriage, I've started to live my life more focused on myself, says Hannah. While Se-young's decision to not marry was influenced by seeing how her mother and grandmother have been treated as subordinates in her family. Protests take place online in cities across the country. A 2018 women's rights rally in Seoul lasted 33 hours as one woman after another took to the stage to relate their experiences of gender abuse. Korean newspaper The Sisa Times reported that 65% of women in the country do not want children. Some 42% do not want to get married, with over 80% of those citing domestic violence as their key reason. Basically, Korean women grew sick of Korean men who became sex and porn obsessed, with sex crimes rates against women growing like crazy too. Women claimed to have struggled with being victims of domestic violence and suffered from the lack of laws protecting them. A 2015 South Korean government study revealed that almost 80% of women had been sexually harassed at work. Digital crime, including stalking and sexual harassment, such as molka, the act of upskirting and secretly filming women in bathrooms, is rife. Under current legislation, men accused of stalking can ask their victims to drop charges. Last year, a man murdered his former colleague after she refused to do so. Women literally got sick of men over there, and they decided to just exist without them. There is much more to the subject of South Korea and the Before movement, but I want to speak about the movement migrating to the rest of the world and how it evolved. If you watch my channel, you know I'm not a hardcore feminist and I follow logic. So I had to dive deeper into the subject of why women in Western countries started adopting this movement too, and what were the arguments. So in the Western world, the B4 movement is of course a bit different, even though it's based on the same principles. Women simply state that there is nothing in it for them in marriage, in having kids, in being a wife. There is no incentive. There are no pros, only cons. They claim that current economic situation forces both spouses into full-time workforce, trying to make ends meet. Women don't have the time to properly raise their children. They need to work to then pay someone else to raise them. Prices of property, groceries, everything really, any service imaginable have skyrocketed. Literally, things have never been more expensive than now. And that will, of course, affect the decision of young people when it comes to planning a family. They also say that unfortunately male minds did not adjust to the times we live in, and they still expect the woman to take care of all the household chores and taking care of children while also contributing 50% to the family finances, sometimes even being the main breadwinner. Women in many countries don't get maternity leave, for example, and if they do, it's usually just a few short weeks or months. They have to give birth and then they have to put the infant into nursery and go back to work. Also, while being bombarded with information, how important it is for the baby and mother to spend all the time together, how it's necessary to breastfeed full time, and how the baby literally thinks they are one with the mother up until 6 months old. Here is a snippet of the article I found on MSN talking more about the reason why women in Western countries are adopting the 4B movement. Mind you, I don't agree with everything written here, but I'll share my thoughts in a bit. The 6B4T movement in China shares many of the B4 movement's core tenets, with additional focuses on rejecting oppressive beauty standards and hypersexualized media depictions. Global feminist concerns. Many of the issues underlying the B4 movement, gender wage inequality, social pressure on women, objectification, exploitation, gender-based violence, misogynistic attitudes, economic hardship, are certainly not unique to South Korea. Many other women in other countries face similar challenges, albeit in varied context. And finally, changing attitudes towards marriage and family. Declining fertility rates and rising numbers of single-person households are trends seen in many developed nations like Japan and parts of Europe. This reflects changing priorities and a greater emphasis on individual choice. Here is a clip by a content creator that tries to explain the phenomenon further.
Birth rates are dropping and governments are panicking. I think, oh great, our population's dropping. That's just what this world needs. When actuality, fiscally, our society is structured in a way that relies on the working class as taxes, so working age people, to take care of the elderly. So our societal structure is about twofold. U.S. fertility rate is hitting record lows. It hit record low 2020, 2019, and 2018 with the pandemic helping pick things up momentarily. Policymakers who are structuring our society have long agreed upon a 2.1 replacement level fertility. However, since the government started tracking fertility rates in the 1930s, we have now fallen to the lowest of ever fertility rate of 1.64 children per woman. What happens if we fall below this 2.1 replacement fertility level is our population starts to grow older and shrink, and that slows economic growth and strains government budgets. As we see these older generations like boomers who are growing up with 7 children in the family move into old age, we need an equal working class to be able to fund different government programs we have for the elderly, such as Social Security, Medicare. Not to mention, things are about to get a lot more expensive for our children. We think inflation's bad now. Half of our state government's revenue comes from sales tax. And if there is less of a population spending money, guess what they have to do? Increase sales tax and increase the cost of goods.
So basically what we see happening at the moment is the government is crying and begging women to make more kids, but women are like, what's in it for me? The government says, well, nothing really, but you have to keep making more humans so we can keep making a lot of money. And women just say, no, thank you. Here are some user comments on the video. Just saw a video of a woman who had quadruplets in the US and her hospital bill exceeded $4 million. So, and this one, it's not a conspiracy. One of the elected officials actually said all women owe the country a worker. They know what they're doing. And another one, I want babies, plural, but my husband reminds me we can't afford one without living in poverty, so we have 0. You can see the trend in these responses, right? What does the government do? Invites immigrants, in fact. Allows mass immigration to gain advantage over other countries within the next 50 years. Locals don't want to make babies? Fine. We'll bring some new people into the country and let them have as many babies as possible. Instead of finding ways to support the legal citizens and come up with incentives to spike the birth rates, they're just allowing mass immigration, allegedly. Anyway, after seeing this video, I was very curious to check the birth rate of Cyprus, where I live, and here it is, declining year after year. In fact, Cyprus Mail wrote, Cypriot birth rates falling by hundreds a year. For someone from a big country, it might sound like a small number, but for a tiny island, it's insanely worrying statistic. There is also a claim that paired up with mass migration, the native population is simply being replaced by foreigners. legal immigrants, and mostly illegal immigrants. As you see, it's a much larger problem on a truly global scale. Women refusing to birth children, consciously choosing to be single and not interact with men already wiped out the generation in South Korea. Los Angeles Times wrote, "One sign of South Korea's population crisis, rural elementary schools are running out of children." But the scarcity weighing on her most heavily, the one that had become the defining crisis of her short tenure, wasn't money, it was students. South Koreans have been opting for smaller and smaller families, leaving the country with the lowest fertility rate in the world and a sharp nationwide drop-off in school-age children. In the hardest hit rural areas, elementary schools like Dohang were closing down one by one because there were no longer enough students left to attend them. The 4B movement in South Korea started 5 years ago. That's all it took to plummet birth rates and have empty classrooms in elementary schools today. Schools are closing down. There aren't enough children. It's a problem that has so many different aspects and I think is beyond left versus right. Because I can already see the headlines: woke feminists hate men, woke feminists swear off men. This is a bigger issue going beyond conservatives and liberals. It's something that's happening on both sides. It is not just hardcore feminists or the oppressed tradwives. It's a movement against the system that drove women to simply give up. Having said that though, let's not forget this important factor that it's women who fought for equality, it's women who tried to prove they can be as productive in the workplace as men, it's women who shamed each other for being stay-at-home mothers, and it's women who set a bar for each other for having to do it all and do it perfectly. However, despite all that, you'd hope the reaction of men would be to advocate for better rights for their women, right? Longer and paid parental leaves, some better benefits for mothers who have more kids, advocating for schools to have programs to prepare young people to live in marriage. I had that in school. Part of it was sexual education, but mostly it was to prepare young men to be good husbands and young women to be good wives. Ages ago, schools were teaching simple life skills like cooking, sewing, cleaning, making your bed, gardening. Not only this, getting ready to have children, how to take care of them, what's needed. Apply it for all sexes and you will have fully independent and functioning adults ready to share a life with someone. That means women wouldn't complain about having lazy husbands, husbands wouldn't complain about having nagging wives. Simply put, we all know that times have changed, and if women in the past could be taught how to take care of the house, we can bring it back and teach young men the same thing. Government could also invest in psychological care of kids and young adults to avoid domestic violence in the future. I mean, there are many things that can be done, and if you find my proposed ideas here delusional, let's sit down, brainstorm. I obviously don't have all the answers, but I know one thing. Putting women against men and vice versa is the worst idea ever. Unfortunately, there are men that react to all this like toddlers. There are men who are swearing off women and creating their own movement called 4G.
4G movement for men. No sex, no time, no provisions, and no babies. So for the men that are doing this and they're saying no to women entirely, does this mean that strip clubs, corn, escorts, looking at women on Instagram, is that all off? I've never been more excited to watch the crime rates drop. And this is so funny because men are so focused on counteracting whatever women's movement is happening. They're missing the whole plot. 4B wasn't started to punish men. As the ones that are being oppressed, women knew that they would have no power over men anyways, so they just said peace out. And it's so funny because the men that are part of this movement think that they're doing it to punish us. Is this like their attempt at reverse psychology? Because they're giving us literally what we want. They're saying no babies, cool, you weren't involved anyway. They're saying no sex, great, you weren't good at it anyway. They're not giving any of their time to women, okay, so nothing's gonna change. No provisions since they've all been such amazing providers. Women started 4B to protect themselves and men are starting 4G just out of spite. It's giving men you're fired and then the men are like, no, I quit first, I quit before I get fired.
Here are some comments on this video. No sex? So you're saying that after years of I couldn't help it, she was just too appealing, now suddenly you can control yourselves? And this one, I'm glad the 4G movement is supporting us in 4B. And this one, remember when the response to Me Too movement was him too? 4G is their attempt to belittle the 4B movement in the same way. They can't stand when women unite. Like with everything in our times, there is always overcorrection. Movement that has valid grounds for existing and valid reasons for women to reevaluate the way they exist on this planet, realizing that current laws are actually completely against them, has been trivialized. Now men call women feminazis again and create their own silly movement to spite women. That's the problem with our world today. People have trouble to unite in order to accomplish a certain goal, because this is how the 4G movement men think.
The 4B movement is going to force men to be red pill. It doesn't matter if you're single, married, in a relationship. You're going to be forced to be a red pill brother, man. And if you're already a red pill man right now, this 4B movement is a victory for us, because everything that we've said, every boundary that we set, that's what we meant. And this is why they have to do what they have to do. You understand what I'm saying? Because we told them we don't want no old single mothers. We don't want women with high body counts. They have to do this, guys. You have to understand this is a victory for men. Because listen, we know that the majority of the women who are talking all this about the 4B movement, they've hit the wall, they're over 30, they had children before they got married, they've never been married, but they got children, and they got a high body count, bro. You know what I'm saying? So they're doing us a favor.
See, I also advocate against women's promiscuity. I think it's unhealthy and it's one of the giant problems in our society, as well as men who are promiscuous and consume adult content. Because the same men who don't want women to be super free seek those women to satisfy their needs. That's why, like I said at the beginning, I see both sides. In fact, I don't think there even are two sides. It's just a mess. Never in history, men and women should have united and worked out their differences more than today. Both sexes need help to find their way. Times have changed. I am not talking about stereotypical gender roles here, but establishing new ways of cultivating healthy and balanced households, making each other happy, growing mentally stable and confident kids. If 4B Western women expect men to change for the better, they should advocate for young boys to be better educated, to be protected from influences of the shitty world we live in. Our society raises weak men who can't resist their desires, who can't control themselves. At the same time, we raise women who think being liberated and free means showing off their bodies, earning money through getting naked. People, men and women, are unhappy in this world. They don't want to bring new life to it. But what I'm afraid is going to happen, the movement that has very valid points and addresses real issues will be Me Too'd. It will stop being logical and at some point, and it will just become this ridiculous trend that everyone cringes at. Because as soon as you put a label on something, it's done.
Everyday therapist, mother made me just an appendage, live to attendance. Got 24/7 baby machine, so he can live.
How are men gonna take it seriously? It reminds me of this lockdown video of Gal Gadot we all hated so much. Problem is, liberal governments around the world feed on division and are against cultivating partnership of men and women, traditional family values, investing money in bettering the conditions for the mothers and fathers, and educating in the right direction for their kids. They make sure there are rainbow flags in every school, and little boys know they could be little girls if they wanted to. I know I am generalizing, but my brain hurts from the amount of bullshit thrown at us every day, destroying society. And that's why it's so sad that any action is always adopted by one of the radical political movements and ridiculed by the other. Of course, on the other hand, there are politicians who claim that the decrease in population is a good thing. Take a look.
A video is going viral of a member of Congress trying to scare everyone about the falling birth rates in America. The problem with this is the only thing that this negatively affects is capitalism and billionaires. It's a positive for everyone else in the entire country. With birth rates falling, that means there's less competition at work, and that means that there's more people that are likely to get hired into high-paying positions than there were before. This man was saying that teachers are already noticing that there is a decrease in students enrolling in public school. That means there's more focus on kids in school, there's less packed classrooms, and teachers can actually do more of their job. Whenever they talk about falling birth rates, the only people that are scared are the billionaires. And I know that maybe down the road, hundreds or thousands of years, it could potentially be an issue. But for the short term and the way people are being treated in America right now, the fact that there's going to be less people, less traffic, less competition for jobs, less...
Okay, so what do you believe? Having less babies or more babies is the way to go? Is maintaining high birth rates a sole responsibility of women? Should men and women work out their differences and work together to create a new, better reality for our kids? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, turn on the notifications to never miss another Daily Freddo episode. And for even more content, check out my Patreon account and follow me on Instagram @DailyFreddo. That's all for today. Have a good one.